Hi, everybody. I'm really sorry this new lecture took so long to make. I'm having troubles going back and forth between home and work, and because I can only record at home, but I'm working in the classroom now, and it's been difficult to get used to. Okay, so World War I is a new kind of war. And there was a stalemate at the Western Front. Just so we're clear on what the Western Front is: Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, France, and the war was going this way, and the war was going this way. The Western Front was in France, and the Eastern Front was Russia. Right now, we're talking about the Western Front. So everyone knows that Germany had this plan to cut through Belgium, get to France really, really fast, and turn around and come back over to Russia. But it didn't work out for them. First off, the name of that plan, the plan to go over here and then come back over here really quick, was the Schlieffen Plan. S-C-H-L-I-E-F-E-N plan. The Schlieffen Plan. Because the guy who came up with that plan, his last name was Schlieffen. It was the Schlieffen Plan. It didn't work. There were a bunch of reasons it didn't work. First off, remember, the whole reason they thought it was going to work was because Russia was lame. Russia was backwards and poor, and they were going to be really slow, and they weren't going to be able to get their army ready. Well, Russia actually was able to get their army ready pretty fast. And they sent a whole bunch of soldiers over towards Germany. So Germany had to take some of their troops they had over here and send them back to Russia as quickly as they could. Also, Belgium, that's in here in the middle, they were this tiny little country that didn't want to have anything to do with the war. And Germany thought they would be able to just bulldoze right through Belgium quickly. But they couldn't, because Belgium actually put up a big fight. And Great Britain had come to help. So they're fighting a lot more than Germany expected it to happen. And there was a big stalemate here. A stalemate is when no one gains any land. They just kind of stopped right here. The war stopped right here, and France couldn't get any further east, but Germany couldn't get any further west, and they were just trapped right there, and they kept shooting at each other. Like the French would gain maybe just a tiny little bit of land, and then the Germans would gain a tiny little bit of land, but they were stuck right there. And eventually they realized they weren't going anywhere, and they dug trenches. A trench is like, imagine if you were to dig down in the ground an entire hallway down in the ground. That's a trench. Let me pull up trench warfare. Trench warfare, and show you some pictures. Here we are. This is a trench. You see how these guys are down inside a trench? That's what that is called. And this is how they fought the war for 4 years. 4 years. They lived and slept. They ate, they slept, they used the bathroom, They did everything in these trenches for 4 years on the Western Front. The Western Front was trench warfare. Now, another reason that it was a new kind of war, let me start a new page, go back to a black pen, was there were these huge casualties. That means deaths and severely hurt people, because there were all these new inventions that made war different than it had been in the past. They had rapid fire machine guns, long range artillery guns, long range artillery guns means long range means these guns could shoot really far in the distance. And these long range artillery guns, what they were basically doing was they were shooting bombs. But when those things exploded, shrapnel went everywhere. Shrapnel is like big chunks of metal flying off the bullet. And more soldiers were injured by shrapnel than from the actual bullet itself. It was also poison gas. Poison gas was first used by the Germans. And poison gas was awful. It was like this ball of gas, and it made it like almost impossible for people to breathe. And it poisoned and killed thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers. Well, there were also submarines. And the German submarines were called U-boats. Why are they called U-boats? Because in German, they were undersea boats. I want to point out something that's interesting that doesn't really have anything to do with world history right now. English is a Germanic language, and the closest language to English is German. And look, undersea. It's like undersea boat. It's an undersea boat. And so you can see how English is so similar to German. So instead of calling them undersea boats, the Americans called them U-boats. So a U-boat is a submarine. It's just a German submarine. So they called them by their own name, U-boats. And the Germans also had Zeppelins. A Zeppelin, let me show you a Zeppelin. A Zeppelin was this huge balloon filled with gas, and Germany used these to carry bombs. There's one right there. This Zeppelin is carrying bombs, and they would go over Britain and drop bombs on Britain. Let's see, what else did they have that was new? Oh, we had airplanes. This is the first time anyone ever used airplanes in war. And at first, they used airplanes just for surveillance. They would fly over enemy territory with a camera so they could take pictures and say, now we know where the enemy is. But eventually, they put guns on the airplanes And then both sides had guns had airplanes with guns on them, and they would have battles in the sky. And those battles in the sky were called dogfights. Don't ask me why, because I don't know the answer. But when two airplanes with guns on them have a battle in the middle of the sky, it's called a dogfight. Yeah, okay. All these new weapons, zeppelins, submarines, airplanes. And so it made for many, many, many more hurt and dead soldiers than in any war that had ever been fought before. Because in wars before, people were, like they had in the American Revolution, in the French Revolution, they had guns, but you could shoot exactly one bullet. And then you had to pull out some cloth and you had to clean out your gun. And then you had to get another bullet and load it. And then you could shoot one gun, one bullet again. That was it. Now we've got rapid fire machine guns that will shoot hundreds of bullets all at the same time, and bombs and shrapnel flying everywhere, and airplanes with guns on them, and zeppelins to drop bombs, and submarines under the ground with bombs on them. So a submarine could go under a ship that was coming and blow up the ship. This was definitely a new kind of war. All right, so, in 1914, Russia pushed into Germany. I'm gonna draw my map again because, wow, this is so important that you guys know this. Russia, France, Great Britain's up here, Serbia's down here. They're the ones that started the whole thing, and we never even really hear about them again. So Russia pushed into Germany and was doing really, really well, and then lost at the Battle of Tannenberg. Russia was going into Germany and was doing really, really well. And then Germany pushed back hard. And this town right here was Tannenberg. Germany won, and Russia had to turn around and retreat back into Russia. It was a big, big loss for Russia. Big loss for Russia was the Battle of Tannenberg. All right, now in the Balkans, I hope you all remember where the Balkans are. You should. The Balkans, here we are, I'm opening up the map. These countries here, the Balkans, Bulgaria joined in with the Central Powers. So Austro-Hungary is here, Germany's here, and Bulgaria joined in with the Central Powers. And why did they do that? It doesn't seem to make any sense, because the Bulgarians are Slavs. The Bulgarians are Slavs and the Serbians are Slavs. So you would think that they would all want to be buddies and fight with Russia against Germany, but no, petty rivalries. Bulgaria didn't like Serbia. And because Bulgaria didn't like Serbia, Bulgaria joined in with the Central Powers to fight against Serbia. And Romania, this is Romania. Romania was promised that if they joined the Allies would give them land, more land. And so they did. They joined the Allies, but they were crushed by the Central Powers. So let me draw you one of my cute little maps. I think maybe they help more. Okay, so let me get my stylus. Sorry, this is taking me a minute. I just want to erase this stuff so you can understand. Okay, so once again, Austro-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Serbia asks Russia for help. Russia says yes. Germany declares war on Russia and then France declares war on Germany. So now we've got little baby Serbia down here. Bulgaria is a Slavic nation. So you would think that they would join Serbia and Russia, but they didn't because Bulgaria doesn't like Serbia. So Bulgaria joined in with Germany and Austro-Hungary to beat up on Serbia. Then Romania, the Allies, France, Great Britain, and Russia, they told Romania, if you'll help us fight, we'll give you land. But it didn't work out because the Central Powers here, they crushed Romania and took over Romania, so it became part of the Central Powers. Then in 1915, finally we're getting to Italy, and the Allies, these guys, Great Britain, France, and Russia, had agreed in secret, this is big, they had agreed in secret, if they would help the Allies, Italy's down here, the Allies told Italy, if you'll help us fight the Central Powers, then when we win, we're going to give you part of Austro-Hungary, because lots of Italians lived here in this part of Austria-Hungary. And the Allies said, if you help us fight the Central Powers, when this whole thing is over, we're going to give you part of that land. It was all a big secret. And so that agreement was secret. And so Italy joined in with the Allies because they wanted that land. But that ended up being completely disastrous for Italy because they lost battle after battle after battle, and the Central Powers rushed into Italy. Okay, now we've got war all around the world. Why did this war ever leave Europe? Well, because we learned in the past unit, what was Unit 3 about? Unit 3 was about imperialism. And what did Europe do all over Asia and Africa? European countries colonized in Asia and Africa. So there were little French colonies in Africa, and there were little British colonies in Africa, and there were little German colonies in Africa, and the same thing in Asia. And now these colonies are fighting with each other. The French colonies were fighting with the German colonies. So there was war everywhere. And to get more soldiers, France was going to their colonies in West Africa and making West Africans go to Europe and fight for them. And Britain was doing the same thing. Britain was going to their colonies in Asia and Africa and making people fight for them. And Germany was doing the same thing, going to their colonies and getting people that had never even been to Europe before, people that had never touched a gun before. We're getting them and training them and sending them off to Europe and making them fight their war for them. But at the same time, wars were happening there in their colonies. French soldiers were attacking German colonies. German soldiers were attacking French colonies. And there was just fighting everywhere. Woo. So by 1915, the Allies had soldiers from India, Australia, New Zealand, and African colonies, and Asian colonies. They were taking people from all these places and making them fight their war. Because remember, India was controlled by Britain at this time. So Britain was just going to India and picking random men and saying, okay, you're going to Europe, you got to go fight for us. Then, what else was happening? The Ottomans, I'm going to draw my map again. You guys are, I hope you have this map drilled into your head. Germany, Austro-Hungary, Serbia. Now we've got Bulgaria and Romania, Russia, France, Belgium, Great Britain, and now over here is the Great Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, which now is modern day Turkey, the Ottoman Empire joined in with the Central Powers. So now these are all the Central Powers. Oh, and Romania. These are all the Central Powers, and everybody else is the Allies. Right about here, right about here, there's the Dardanelles Strait. And the Ottoman Empire cut this off for supplies, because supplies from Great Britain and France, remember, Great Britain and France are way richer and more industrialized than Russia, but they're all friends. They're all fighting on the same team. So Great Britain and Russia would send supplies like this up to Russia to help them. But the Ottoman Empire has now joined in with the Central Powers, and the Ottoman Empire cuts this line off and makes it so those supplies can't get through. That was the Dardanelles Strait. The Ottoman Empire cut off the supply line between Great Britain and France to Russia. All right, we're getting there. Turkey was part of the Ottoman Empire, and now it's all that remains of the Ottoman Empire. But at this time, the Ottoman Empire was huge, and Turkey was just the center of it. At the top of Turkey, there were mountains called the Caucasus Mountains. The Caucasus Mountains, and there was lots and lots of fighting going on here. And in the Caucasus Mountains is where the Armenians lived. The Armenians were part of the Ottoman Empire. But you have to remember, the Armenians were Christian, the Ottoman Empire was Muslim, and they didn't treat the Christians very nicely. The Christians were like second-class citizens. So when the Russians were down here fighting, right here, this fight in the Caucasus Mountains, this was between the Russians and the Ottomans. And the Armenians, who were part of this empire, they turned and they joined with the Russians, and they started fighting against the Ottomans because they didn't like the Ottomans anyway. They were oppressive leaders. And because of that is why the Armenian genocide happened. The Ottomans told the Armenians they had to leave. They made them all pack up and leave. They did a mass murder of lots of them. And then they took others and kicked them out of their homes and said, oh yeah, you don't like our empire? Get out. And they had to just like grab their bags and walk, like forever, just walk away. And they didn't have any food and they didn't have any shelter, and lots of them starved to death. And that was the Armenian genocide. Exact same Armenian genocide we learned about in the last unit. It was just we kind of touched on it in the last unit, and this one is more explanation. In the top of Turkey, the north of Turkey, they're the Caucasus Mountains, and that's where the Russians and the Ottomans were fighting. And the Armenians joined the Russians and fought against the Ottomans. And the Ottomans said, oh yeah, you want to fight against us? Get out of our land. And then that was the Armenian genocide. Also, more war around the world. The Ottoman Empire at this time controlled a lot of the Middle East. Let me show you a map. Oh, good, I've already got it open. Okay, so right here where it says Turkey, the Ottoman Empire was huge at this time. It was big. It wasn't just Turkey. But the Ottomans controlled a whole bunch of this land over here. And at the same time that World War I was raging over here, nationalist movements were rising up over here. And Iraq wanted to fight against Turkey, to fight against the Ottoman Empire to get their independence. But the Ottoman Empire was crazy busy fighting World War I over here. And Great Britain said, let me make sure, yes. Great Britain saw this as an excellent opportunity to gain power over here. and to also help destroy the Ottoman Empire. So Great Britain sent troops over here to Iraq to help the Iraqis, the Iraqi national movement, fight against the Ottoman Empire. And they won. So this region here got their independence from the Ottoman Empire thanks to help from Great Britain. And all right, a bit more. So the countries, pretty much all the countries, the European countries, they were all the governments were panicking and had no idea how they were going to win this war. Everybody was like, this is the craziest, deadliest, scariest, most awful war the whole world has ever seen, and we've got to end this thing. So all of them decided we had to have a total war. Total war means involving every part of your nation towards the war effort. They did this thing called conscription. Maybe you've heard of the draft before. The draft is when every young man in a nation has to turn in their name to the government. And if the government decides you have to go be a soldier, you got to go be a soldier. That's conscription. Countries also did rations. They said every family is only allowed to buy 1 kilo of rice per week. I'm making up these numbers. Every family is only allowed to have 2 kilos of meat. I don't know what the real numbers are, but that's what a ration is. When they tell you exactly how much you're allowed to buy, no more. And they did that for everything. They did it for shoes, they did it for clothing, they did it for cigarettes, they did it, everything was rationed because they didn't want the civilians, the people that weren't fighting back home, they didn't want them to buy up things that were needed in the war. Women at this time, women played quite a role really in the war because all the men were off fighting and women had to run society. Women worked in the factories, women ran the factories, women were nurses, women were the farmers, women grew the food, women did everything. And it was that power of the women during war that eventually led to women's rights and women being able to vote, but this is much later. So now we have economic warfare. Economic warfare. All right, so here's Great Britain. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Great Britain and Germany is a little further down. Let's say Germany is here, and Great Britain set up blockades. And this is the ocean. Hopefully you all know that. The ocean is here. Well, Germany set up blockades right here of ships, warships, all along here that made it so that supply lines to Germany couldn't get through. Nobody could get nobody could get their ships to Germany. They did it here too. And Germany had a really, really, really hard time. It became really hard to feed the people because there wasn't any food coming into Germany. And then Germany set up their own blockade. Germany brought submarines over here. This is where Ireland is. Ireland had nothing really to do with World War I except this one little bit that I'm about to say. Germany came over here with submarines and set up their submarines around here, right around in here. And anytime ships came by, they would bomb the ships that were going to Great Britain. But they made a big mistake. Germany bombed, where is it? Sorry. Germany bombed the Lusitania. Know this name. It was a ship. Germany bombed the Lusitania and 1,200 innocent people died. 128 of them were American citizens. This is when the United States starts looking very closely at World War I. The president at the time, the US president, was Woodrow Wilson. And he was mad at Germany because Germany just killed 128 American citizens. And he told Germany, you better not ever do that again. If you ever do that again, we are ending all diplomatic ties with you. That means we'll, like the government, we're not ever talking to you again, ever. And when that happened, Germany said, okay, if we are going to bomb a ship again, we'll give a warning first. We'll give a warning and we'll give enough time for the innocent people to get on escape boats and get away before we blow up the ship. Also, there was a propaganda war. That's all one word. Sorry about that space. Propaganda war. The propaganda war. Propaganda is the spreading of ideas to promote a cause or to damage the other side. Maybe I should write all that down. Spreading of ideas to promote a cause or to damage the opposing side. That's what propaganda is. And different countries have their different kinds of propaganda. Some would make posters making everything in the war seem awesome. Yeah, we're doing great. Or they would make propaganda posters making the other team seem really bad and scary. Germany's awful. Russia's awful. Great Britain's a terrible place. And it's to try to make you, the civilian, really, really love your country and really, really hate the other country. That's what propaganda is. Anything that is used to make you have this feeling of hatred towards someone else or extreme love towards your own country, that's propaganda. And lots of times it's not true. It's all lies, it's all made up, and it's just to make you hate them. Like, I don't know. When I was a kid in the United States growing up, there was a lot of anti-Russian propaganda. And so anytime there was a Russian character in a movie, they were always ugly. They were mean and they were ugly. That's propaganda to make me as a young American child be afraid of Russians. And well, yeah, that's a really good example. That's what propaganda is. If you make a poster on a wall that says something, I don't know, about Germans, and all the Germans kind of look like monsters, that's propaganda to make you fear or dislike Germans. Everybody does it. But it was really big during World War I. And the British and the French press, the newspapers, the British and the French newspapers were really, really bad about making up stories about the Germans. Totally make up horrible, awful, mean stories about the Germans, making them out as terrible monsters. But like, people don't know it's a lie. You read it in the newspaper, so it's supposed to be true, right? Propaganda. In 1917, by 1917, now remember, the war began in 1914. This is 3 years of war, 3 years of hundreds of thousands of soldiers dying. It's awful, it's terrible. 3 years of living in trenches. It's been a long, long time. By 1917, morale was down everywhere. In all these countries, morale is like your feelings. Just nobody wants to be doing this anymore. Everybody's tired of the war. Everybody wants the war to stop. Well, in March of 1917, there were bread riots in St. Petersburg, Russia. Bread riots, think of the Women's March in outside Versailles. What were they screaming? Bread, bread, bread. When the people, just in general, when the people are so poor, they can't even afford to buy food for their families, and they revolt, that riot is called a bread riot. It doesn't necessarily have to be about bread, but if the people, this is any riot anywhere in the world, bread riots happen right now in 2020. Anywhere in the world where the people are so poor, they can't afford to buy basic food just to feed their children. When those people riot and rebel against the government, it's called a bread riot. So in March 1917 in St. Petersburg, Russia, there were bread riots in the streets. There was a revolution. They overthrew the Tsar. Not going to talk much about that right now because there's a whole lecture on it later, but that happened. The Allies, remember, Russia was an ally. All the other allies thought, that's fantastic. Now the Tsar is gone. Russia's going to turn into a democratic nation, and they're going to become stronger, and the people are going to be better because they're going to be happier because they're led in a democratic society. But instead, what happened was this guy Lenin came into power And Lenin came into power by promising the people to get them out of the war. Out of war. Lenin told all the people, if I get to be your next leader, I'm going to take you out of the war. And because morale was so low and people were so tired of fighting, oh my God, nobody wanted to be fighting anymore. Lenin took control, and he did it. He where are we? In 1918, Lenin signed the Treaty of Litovsk, the Treaty of Litovsk, and that removed Russia from the war. Russia is no longer in World War I. With no Russia left to fight, now Germany could turn everything towards the Western Front. I'm going to draw this map that you all love so much once again. Germany, Austro-Hungary, Russia, France, Great Britain. Now we've got the Ottomans in here. And you know what? Let's give Serbia and Romania and Bulgaria and Romania. Okay, so Germany is fighting with Russia and France. But suddenly, Russia isn't in the war anymore. Russia's gone. Now, Germany can turn everything towards the Western Front. So Germany got all their soldiers that had been over here and turned them back through here to fight on the Western Front. At this time, Americans, United States citizens, lots of Americans felt this real emotional attachment to Great Britain. And they wanted Britain to win because, you know, originally Americans were British colony, America was a British colony, and they felt this emotional attachment to Great Britain. They wanted Great Britain to win. And also, at the same time, so not really, I don't mean at the same time, but just Americans had felt this attachment to Great Britain and really wanted the Allies to win. Well, Germany announced that they weren't going to follow that agreement anymore that they had made with Woodrow Wilson. You know, the agreement that they would give a warning first before they blew up ships. Well, Germany said they weren't going to do that anymore. They were just going to blow up the ships because Russia was out. Germany wanted to be able to push through and just end this war. Everybody wants this war to be over, and they have decided they're going to do everything they can to destroy the Allies. So they said they weren't going to do that anymore. And that is when the United States said, that's it, we're done, we're joining the war. Also, one more thing that made the US really mad was the US found out that the Central Powers, Germany, Austro-Hungary, and the Ottomans, these guys had offered Mexico. Let me go to a map of the US. Let me go over to the US. I always do this. I should go the other way. It would be faster. Okay, remember, all this land here in the Southwest used to be part of Mexico. Well, the Central Powers told Mexico, if you will help us fight the United States, when we win, we're going to give you all this land back. So the US found out that the Central Powers had made that deal with Mexico at the same time that Germany said they weren't going to honor the agreement to give a warning about blowing up ships anymore. And Woodrow Wilson said, that's it, we're in the war. And that's when the United States joined Great Britain and France in World War I. So it was April 1917. The US declared war on Germany. We're almost finished. We're almost finished. Woodrow Wilson, that was April 1917. In 1918, the US sent 2 million soldiers to Europe. Now, I know 2 million sounds like a big number, and it is a big number, but compared to all the soldiers that were already fighting in the war, 2 million wasn't really that many. They didn't really send that many soldiers, but they sent 2 million. And Woodrow Wilson wrote up this list of the 14 points. And this was his idea, the 14 points. These are 14 things to end the war. 14 points to end the war. In his 14 points, there was freedom of the seas, free trade, large scale reduction of arms. Arms are weapons. What this means is countries need to get rid of their weapons. You have too many of them, let's get rid of them. They said in Eastern Europe, these countries should have self-determination. That means they get to decide how they rule. If Eastern Europe wants to set up a monarchy, they should set up a monarchy. If these countries in Eastern Europe want to be democracies, let them be democracies. Let them make their own decisions. And he suggested the creation of a general association of nations to keep the peace. So this doesn't happen again. No more wars like this. We should have like a club where people from all the different countries get together and talk and work out their differences. This isn't all 14 of them, but these are the big ones. And Woodrow Wilson said, if we can all agree to these 14 points, the war should be over. Well, in 1918, Germany pushed really hard into France. They were pushing hard and they were doing well. That's right when the American soldiers showed up. the Americans showed up, and yay, the French were so happy. The French and the British, they were fighting too. And, you know, they had been just, they were tired of war. Morale was horrible. Nobody wanted to be there. And in come these young, new, fresh people that are all excited about the war. These guys haven't been fighting for 4 years. These guys are brand new to the war. They're excited, and they get everyone excited. And then once everybody was excited about everything, the Germans started losing, because these guys are all really, really strong now because everybody's excited about fighting. The British and the French are happy that the Americans are there, and the Americans are just excited about war. And they start pushing the Germans back. And then when they push the Germans back, the German army leaders tell the Kaiser, who's like the leader of Germany, the president, the king, the emperor, whatever, the leader of Germany, the army leaders tell the Kaiser, there's no way we're going to win this. It's not going to happen. And when that happened, the people of Germany revolted against the Kaiser, and they blamed the loss. They blamed everything on him. He got scared and ran away to the Netherlands. So he's scared, ran away, lived in the Netherlands, and so Germany collapsed. So now Austro-Hungary is left fighting Great Britain and France. But there was also a collapse in Austro-Hungary. The people revolted against their leaders. Everybody was tired of the war. Nobody wants to be in this thing anymore. They revolted. And remember, this was an empire. This was an ancient empire that had been around for centuries. The last family to lead the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, their names were the Habsburgs. They fell. This is when the Austro-Hungarian Empire fell, and the Habsburgs fell along with it. So they're gone. Now we've got the Ottomans that are still fighting. The Ottomans and Bulgaria are still part of the Central Powers, and they're still fighting against these guys, and they ask for peace. They saw little Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire are not going to win against the Allied powers. And they asked for an armistice. An armistice is to end fighting. I'm going to write this in red. At 11 a.m. on November 11th, 1918, the Great War came to an end. With this armistice to end fighting. The Central Powers signed the armistice with the Allies, agreeing to stop fighting. The end.